Hey guys! Tonight we're sinking into silk cushions and sliding past incense smoke as we tiptoe into the world of Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever rule China in her own name. You'll drift past crimson curtains and golden roof tiles through a palace so vast that even the palace cats have their own rankings. You'll breathe in lotus-scented air, listen to the click of carved hairpins, and try not to trip over an unattended scroll. And because it's that kind of night, you'll get just close enough to feel how impossible it was to survive as a girl born into privilege, but not enough privilege. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't have lasted past the age of 8. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in 624 CE, in the twilight of the Sui dynasty's collapse. But don't worry, you won't need to keep track of dynasty charts. Just know that your family name is Wu and your father runs a lucrative lumber business, which means you grow up with calligraphy paper made from the finest mulberry bark and toys carved from sandalwood. You're a girl, which in 7th century China is often synonymous with temporary guest until marriage, but your family is unusually supportive. Your mother doesn't force you into embroidery. Your father lets you read actual books, not just Buddhist aphorisms etched on fans. Historians still argue whether Wu's early literacy was encouraged or merely tolerated. But what's clear is that you develop a taste for words that bite, and sentences that shift like river currents. Outside, the Tang dynasty is blooming. China is rich, connected, and buzzing with poets and merchants. Inside your household, though, you're already studying the currents beneath the surface. You notice how men pause before addressing your mother. You see the silences between servants. You learn that control often comes in the form of quiet observation served cold, like day-old dumplings. You're not conventionally beautiful. That's important. Beauty wins you attention, but cleverness wins you corridors. Wu Zetian chooses the latter, even at 10. By 13. You're summoned to the court of Emperor Taizong. He's the second Tang emperor and fond of horses, falcons, and keeping women around like bookmarks. You become one of his junior concubines. Translation, you now live in a room with 7 other girls, all of whom also want to be Empress someday. It's like a very slow, very polite reality show, but with more hair oil and fewer confessionals. You're clever enough to stay quiet, but visible. You volunteer to groom the emperor's horses, which is unusual for a concubine, but smart. It gets you out into the training grounds, where decisions are made. You also start keeping journals, thin, ink-scented scrolls you hide inside your sleeping mat. Historians debate whether these journals were political commentary or just teen musings. But either way, they show the gears starting to turn. At night, the palace settles into a humid hush. You don't sleep well. You listen to the squeak of lacquered sandals, the whisper of silk against stone, the cough of some courtier to chambers away. You press your ear to the wall and listen, learning to predict who's losing favor by how often the kitchen forgets to send their pickled cabbage. And slowly, very slowly, you realize that love might not be your ladder, but language could be. Taizong barely notices you. You bring him medicinal teas, memorize his favorite passages from the classic of filial piety, and keep your tone soft and reverent. But your glances, they're surgical. You take in his moods, his generals, even the dog that follows him everywhere and gets better food than most bureaucrats. In time, the emperor falls ill. You're around 26, and your days in the inner court seem numbered. When Taizong dies in 649, all of his concubines without children are expected to retire into Buddhist convents. So off you go, shaved head, grey robes, prayers at dawn. You might think this is the end of your story. Girl gets clever. Girl ends up feeding pigeons outside a monastery. But Wu Zetian is not that kind of girl. At this point, historians debate whether what happens next is fate, manipulation, or both. You see, during her time in the palace, Wu Zetian caught the eye of someone else, Li Zi, Taizong's son, who is now Emperor Gaozong. And unlike his father, Lizzie did notice you. Which is why, just 1 year after you disappear behind monastery walls, you're invited back. Officially, you're there to grieve. Unofficially, you're there to reclaim your spot. You wear mourning. White, but your eyes are calm. You observe court ladies with the kind of stare usually reserved for falcons. Your voice stays low, but your opinions grow teeth. And somehow, incredibly, you're back in the palace, not as a ghost, not as a relic, but as a woman who plans to never leave again. You're back in the palace, and this time you know better. You know who arranges the flowers in which halls. You know which eunuchs trade gossip for sesame candies, and which ones sell secrets to the wrong ears. You've returned not just with memories, but with strategy folded neatly like an embroidered handkerchief and tucked into your sleeve. Your new position, official concubine to Emperor Gaozong. The man once shy around you now invites you for evening poetry readings, although you're fairly sure he's in it for your commentary, not the poetry. Other women aren't thrilled, especially Empress Wang, the emperor's current wife, consort Xiao, his longtime favorite. But instead of challenging them directly, you sidestep, you become indispensable. You suggest cures for the emperor's dizzy spells. You read him dream interpretations, always tailored to flatter. You play the long game, and each evening, he grows a little more reliant on the woman who listens better than anyone else. And here's the twist that court records love to tiptoe around. You bear him a child, a son. And in this world, giving birth to a son is like unlocking a cheat code. It elevates your status, it terrifies your rivals. Historians still argue whether the mysterious death of that infant, your first son, was an accident, a political maneuver, or something darker. The official tale: the baby dies suddenly. You blame Empress Wang. Empress Wang denies it. The emperor sides with you. The court buzzes. The child is gone. But the shift in power is irreversible. Your rivals lose ground. You, somehow still grieving, are elevated. Not just another concubine now, but the mother of imperial blood. But don't be fooled. It's not a fairy tale. Not even close. You still sleep with one eye open, and you still don't eat anything unless you've seen someone else eat it first. You begin to establish your inner circle. You reward the discreet, the clever, the loyal. You send silk scraps as messages. You start suggesting edits to court decrees, not officially, of course, just lightly penciled notes in the margins. The emperor reads them, laughs, often adopts them outright. You take up horseback riding again, just as you did in your girlhood. Not for fun, but for image. You need the court to see you not as delicate, but determined, regal, alert. Sometimes you spar with court ladies not with words, but with gifts. They present peonies. You deliver white cranes. They throw parties. You host silent poetry nights and serve chilled lychee wine with ginger-salted plums. And here, quietly, your love of snacks begins to bloom. No, you don't binge eat in some candlelit drama, but you are the sort of woman who notices flavor, who has strong opinions about jujube paste texture and demands that her steamed dumplings be filled with winter vegetables only in winter. You start corresponding with chefs. You ask Buddhist monks about fasting recipes. You study Ayurvedic food pairings, not for health but for court advantage. At this point, palace kitchens whisper about your tastes. You prefer almond jelly with osmanthus syrup before bed. You don't trust raw fruits, except for plums that have been chilled overnight air and brought in before sunrise. Your breakfast is warm millet congee, always with red dates, never lotus seeds. Don't ask why. You become a walking paradox, a woman known for subtle cruelty, who also has a soft spot for pine nut candy. Meanwhile, your political path rises like steam from a rice steamer. You don't move fast. You move consistently. When Gaozong grows ill, migraines that leave him half-blind and easily swayed, it's you who reads edicts on his behalf. At first, just in private, then increasingly in public. One afternoon, as the emperor lies in bed behind a screen, you kneel and speak in his name to the ministers. They lower their heads not to him, but to you, and something shifts in the air. You're not the power behind the throne anymore. You are the throne, just waiting for the furniture to catch up. The other women of the court, furious, but also terrified. You don't strike with screams or poison. You just reassign their brothers to border patrol. You alter the lunch schedule. You remove their favorite storyteller from the roster. It's barely visible. Until they vanish, you begin issuing orders under the Emperor's seal. He's too ill to protest, or perhaps too comforted by the fact that things run better when you're in charge. At night, while the rest of the court drinks plum wine and reads tales of ghost foxes, you draft letters to regional governors. You adjust tax quotas. You edit Confucian phrases to sound more flexible. You also snack. You like sunflower seeds and preserved ginger while you work. Your personal attendant learns to rotate flavors depending on what mood you're in. Hawthorn in the spring, roasted chestnuts in the autumn. The court starts to take notes not just of your decrees, but of your dishes. There's an attempt to derail you. Always is. This time it comes as an accusation of witchcraft. The claim is absurd but popular. You handle it with impeccable calm. You demand an investigation. The accuser is questioned. Gently, then not so gently, then reassigned to go counting duty in the western provinces. You send them a jar of pickled turnips, peace offering. Probably. That night, you sit alone with a porcelain bowl of sticky rice, topped with osmanthus petals and shredded dried mango. It's not imperial, it's not ceremonial, but it is yours. And in this palace, ownership is everything. By the end of this stretch, you are Empress consort, fully recognized. Not a whisper, not a shadow, but fully seated beside the dragon throne. You smile politely. You dress in pearl white robes. You accept formal bows from men who once scoffed at your name. And while they bow, you gently pick at a plate of candied walnuts, nodding graciously, knowing full well that the dynasty has begun to tilt in your direction. You sit in the inner court now, not as decoration, but as design. Your robes are heavier, your meetings longer, and your words weigh more than gold, but you still find time to tweak your sesame flatbread recipe. The palace has begun to orbit. You, whether it admits it or not, you're no longer just Empress consort. Woo. You're her, the woman no one quite knows how to describe. Too elegant to scorn, too clever to dismiss, too powerful to challenge. And it all began with a book, or several books really. See, back when you were a junior concubine technically ranked as Karen, which translates more or less to talented lady. You didn't just charm the emperor with your voice. You caught his attention by quoting Confucius, then disagreeing with him, not loudly, not rebelliously, but just enough to make Gaozong blink and go, HMM. That's not what my tutor said. You read Buddhist sutras, yes, but also legal codes, poetry, military manuals. You could quote Sun Tzu while sipping hawthorn tea. You annotated your own scrolls. Your hand was steady, your brushwork sharp. And because you copied everything in tiny, deliberate characters, your ideas spread through. The palace disguised as practice sheets. Historians still argue whether you had ghostwriters. There's no definitive answer, but the tone of the marginalia is unmistakably yours, measured, ironic, and just a little too clever for a scribe. You begin encouraging women at court to read to not all. Of course, just a few who you trust not to get ideas. Books become gifts in your circle. Illustrated scrolls, dream dictionaries, treatises on garden design. One minister grumbles that your female attendants are spending more time with poetry than with their embroidery hoops. You smile and send him a bowl of lukewarm millet gruel. That shuts him up. The court poets adore you. They write verses comparing you to the moon, the phoenix, even to mountains. You correct their metaphors gently, suggesting the imagery should be more strategic. Less floating mist, more unbending willow. They comply. And in these poetic circles, your name begins to grow. Quietly, unstoppably. But reading isn't just for image, it's ammunition. You study past dynasties. You note what made them fail. Weak heirs, overreaching brothers. Too many foreign alliances, not enough tax reforms. You mark all the cautionary tales. Then you write your own tucked into bedtime parables meant for the emperor's young nephews. Soon, the court scholars, those long-bearded guardians of ritual and status, start to murmur. You're meddling. You're altering interpretation. You're influencing the emperor too much. They're not wrong, but they also can't stop you, because every time one of them complains, you summon him to court, serve him persimmon wine and pumpkin cakes, and calmly ask him to recite the Tang Penal Code from memory. When he fails, you recommend he study more. Perhaps with your guidance, he never complains again. And amid this slow-burning academic coup, you snack. Oh, do you snack? You favor mung bean cakes filled with black sesame paste, delicately sweet and entirely unassuming, just like your policies. You try dry plum with salted licorice. You chew ginger crisps between meetings and insist on tea brewed from the tips of spring shoots only. A dish of candied loquat sits beside your writing brush. You never finish it. It's just there to test who notices. It becomes a quiet power game. Which courtier can guess your favorite flavor? This season, which general tries to impress you with a tray of syrup chestnuts from his homeland? Which lady-in-waiting loses favor because she brings you a walnut tart that's slightly too dry? One time, a rival sends you fried honey dough wrapped in gold leaf. You nod politely and send back a bundle of uncooked rice, a joke, perhaps, or a warning, or just something to think about. But not everyone loves your love of books and snacks. Empress Wang and Consort Shao are still present technically. They still host ceremonies, still issue edicts in the emperor's name, still smile at banquets. But the palace knows, the kitchen knows, the astrologers know. You are now the center, which makes you dangerous, and this is where things start to turn sharper. One spring, Empress Wang attempts a bold move. She accuses you of sorcery. It's a classic, oldest accusation in the handbook. Whispered rumors that you burned incense too often, that your room smelled strange, that perhaps you were summoning spirits at night. You don't blink. You simply request an audience. With the emperor, you arrive wearing plain robes, hair unadorned, carrying no scrolls, just a small bowl of lotus seed soup. You sit beside him and say quietly, "If I am guilty of witchcraft, it is only that I have enchanted you with words." He laughs for 10 full seconds. Then he orders Empress Wang confined to her chambers. From that moment, her days are numbered. You move quickly, strategically. There's no blood, no scandal. Just a slow removal, like erasing a name from a guest list. In 655 CE, Gaozong deposes Empress Wang and elevates you to take her place. You are now officially Empress Wu, not just by favor, not by nickname in ink on parchment, read aloud by trembling officials at court. You nod, you smile, then you eat a honey-dipped rice cake with walnut shavings and return to your work. The incense in your new chambers burns longer now, richer, darker, wrapped in imported sandalwood and a whisper of clove. You don't need to speak much, your presence announces itself. The tiles are polished more carefully in your wing of the palace. The attendants bow lower. The ministers wait longer outside your doors, pretending not to glance at the trays of snacks being ferried past. Your Empress of China now on paper, in practice, and increasingly in tone. The Emperor, Gaozong, still reigns officially, but his health falters. Migraines, fainting spells. And you, always attentive, are there with cool cloths, soothing tea, and a little something sweet, maybe a red bean pastry, or pear slices steeped in chilled plum juice. You begin stepping in to read petitions aloud. At first, only when he's too ill. Then, when he's simply tired. Then, well, no one quite remembers when you started doing it all the time. It's just easier that way. The empire hums smoother with you at the wheel. And still, some don't see it coming. You start attending council meetings behind a silk screen, a quiet veil. Just your silhouette, just your voice. The ministers are unsettled. A woman speaking policy, correcting tax plans, quoting legal code, suggesting that maybe Confucius got it wrong about women needing to stay behind closed doors. Historians still argue whether this is when your real rule begins, or whether it began long before. with your first well-timed smile and a bowl of jujube. Soup. Either way, this is where your power stops hiding. You begin appointing officials. Not directly, of course, but you advise, you nudge. You have the Emperor's seal and his trust. So, your handwriting starts appearing where only his once did. Ministers receive instructions bearing a slightly more elegant brushstroke. You promote scholars who share your vision. You reward administrators who value merit over bloodlines. You sideline conservative Confucians who cough into their sleeves every time you open your mouth. One unlucky official makes the mistake of referring to you as merely the Emperor's helpmeet. You ask him to clarify. He stutters. You smile. The next morning, he finds himself reassigned to grain inventory in a remote southern province where even the snakes wear raincoats. You send him a traveling pouch filled with candied tamarind. No hard feelings. Meanwhile, you sponsor examinations for civil service candidates from poorer backgrounds. It's revolutionary. Suddenly, talent matters more than lineage. Your critics say it's a ploy to fill the bureaucracy with your loyalists. You say it's the future. And during all this reform, you snack. You keep candied orange peel at your side during meetings. You ask the kitchens to invent new fillings for dumplings sweet. Yam and cinnamon, lotus root with pickled tangerine. You commission tea blends, chrysanthemum with honey, green tea with roasted barley. You're not just feeding yourself, you're feeding an image. At this point, the imperial kitchens are practically a think tank. Each dish is political. To sweet implies softness. To plain suggests frugality, but risks disrespect. Too foreign might upset the conservatives. So you walk the culinary tightrope with the grace of someone who knows exactly which sesame seed to press. Your favorite, lately, fried glutinous rice cakes shaped like phoenixes, served warm. Just chewy enough to delay a decision while you think. And behind the sweetness, your intelligence sharpens. You order the compilation of biographies of famous women rulers, poets, widows who held fortresses, scholars who corrected emperors. It's not propaganda, you say. It's history. You also start leaning into Buddhism publicly. You sponsor temple construction. You commission murals of celestial bodhisattvas, shimmering and enormous. Their faces sometimes rumored to resemble your own just a little too closely. But Buddhism isn't just your spiritual aesthetic. It's your strategic counter to the Confucians, whose texts insist that women should stay invisible. The sutras, meanwhile, speak of compassion, rebirth, enlightenment, universal values. You, of course, emphasize the parts about wise rulers and divine right. At a grand ceremony, monks chant blessings for the emperor's health, but everyone's eyes are on you. Your robes are deep crimson embroidered with 1,000-thread golden. Dragon, you carry no weapon, but your fan flicks open like a blade. You walk slowly, deliberately, and every noble family in China adjusts their plans accordingly. But not all is ceremonial. You also know how to move in shadows. You reorganize palace surveillance. The network of informants expands. Everyone is being watched discreetly. Of course, a gesture here, a missed bow there, a subtle change in snack preference, everything is recorded. You once notice a court lady refusing your favorite almond tofu 3 days in a row. She's gone by the 4th. A courtier once jokes that not even the rice listens as well as Her Majesty spies. He laughs. You don't still. You aren't cruel for the sake of cruelty. That would be inefficient. You simply believe in order, in discipline, in vision. If people must be uncomfortable while history is steered into a better lane, so be it. And through it all, Gaozong remains technically in charge. He's your husband, yes, your emperor, your partner. But now, when his hand shakes too much to sign an edict, it is your brush that completes it. He still calls you my Wu Mei, little, Wu. But you're not little anymore. You're the one shaping the dynasty now. You're the one people bow to literally and metaphorically, and the one they fear offending, whether in politics or in pastry selection. One evening, during a banquet, celebrating the grain harvest, you raise a cup of sweet rice wine to the assembled court. You thank the emperor for his wisdom. He nods, eyes glassy. The room watches you. not him. And as the music swells and the dancers whirl like petals in a storm, you pop a candied hawthorn into your mouth and think, soon has arrived. The Emperor's health declines like a drifting lantern softly, gradually, until it's clear the light won't return. He's still alive, still technically Emperor, but increasingly sidelined. You are no longer the whisper. At his side, you are the voice filling the chamber. You've begun to issue edicts in your own name. Not all, not always, but often enough that no one dares correct it. Ministers still add with the Emperor's blessing at the end, but it's ceremonial frosting. The cake is yours still. Protocol must be followed or appear to be. Gaozong still makes public appearances, though it's you who arranges them. He still presides at temple ceremonies, though you often hold the incense. The truth, you are ruling, and everyone knows it. But Empress regnant? Not yet. The word emperor is still masculine, still exclusive. You'll get there. But first, consolidation. You begin refining your court like skimming the fat from a broth. Officials who drag their feet, reassigned. Ministers too attached to the old Confucian order, retired with honor. You replace them with loyalists, often younger, often outsiders to the traditional noble clans. This unsettles the aristocracy, which means you're on the right track. You don't seek chaos. You seek efficiency, and order tastes better than rebellion. Meanwhile, your personal tastes evolve. You ask for more seasonal dishes, pear soup in autumn, chrysanthemum custard in spring. You promote regional delicacies from distant provinces, not because you're nostalgic, but because showing interest in their food makes those governors feel seen, loyal. You're not just building a political base, you're building a palette of influence. Your evenings are quiet but intense. You host reading salons subtly political, affairs disguised as poetry gatherings. There's green tea, steamed buns with red bean paste, and new verses comparing you to the moon. Always the moon. You pretend to blush. You correct their meter. One night, a scholar presents you with a riddle hidden in a poem. You solve it in seconds, then casually inquire whether he's available for a post in the Ministry of Rites. You commission statues of Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, carved in smooth marble, towering above temple courtyards. Some of them bear your facial features, subtly stylized. No one dares mention it aloud. Historians still debate whether these were intentional self-portraits or simply artistic flattery. Either way, the statues stand. You begin appearing in dreams, not yours others. Ministers wake sweaty and contrite after seeing you in tiger form, or as a crane holding a decree in your beak. Peasant women say they see your face in clouds or in the steam of boiling millet. You don't encourage these rumors, but you don't stop them either. And then, in 683, the emperor dies. It is quiet, ceremonial, a soft unraveling. You do not cry. In public, you wear white silk and walk slowly through the mourning procession. Palms pressed together, your expression is unreadable. Tradition says the emperor's oldest son should take the throne, which he does, officially. But you, as Empress Dowager, act as regent just until the boy finds his footing, except he never quite finds it. He questions your reforms. You suggest a rest. He hesitates at a ceremonial rite. You rearrange. The rite then suggests he focus on his health. Eventually, you gently remove him. No execution, no scandal, just retirement. Next son. Similar story. Within 2 years, you've sidelined to emperors and moved the throne's true center forward a few paces, until it aligns exactly with where you're seated. And now you make it official. You don't call yourself Empress. That's old news. That's the wife of an emperor. You call yourself Huang the Emperor, the same title as any man who ruled before. And China doesn't crumble. In fact, the court stabilizes, agriculture improves, the bureaucracy hums like a bamboo grove in spring wind. Your critics are scandalized. The idea of a woman emperor is, to them, as unthinkable as pigs flying or millet raining upward. But none of them can deny that your government works, and it's run from your wing of the palace, redecorated, of course, no garish reds. You favor pale jade, moonlight blues, silver embroidery on slate grey. You sit in council surrounded by scrolls, sages, and snacks. Always snacks. You've grown fond of gooseberries soaked in rice wine. Your kitchen has invented a kind of sesame, brittle so delicate it shatters like spun glass. You prefer it in the late afternoon. With hot jasmine tea. At banquets, your dishes become legend. Lotus roots filled with osmanthus jelly, sweet glutinous dumplings shaped like coins. Even your political enemies admit grudgingly that your palate is impeccable. One daring minister tries to curry favor by recreating your favorite dish from childhood. Unfortunately, he guesses wrong. He serves mung bean cakes with salted plum. You smile graciously, then reassign him to logistics. Let this be a lesson. Flavor matters. In your court, everything is symbolic. A sugared walnut might mean favor. A missing appetizer might mean disgrace. A new tea blend could signal a policy shift. You once delay announcing a military campaign until a dish of longan fruit arrives at the general's table. Longan, symbol of distant vision. The message is clear. Go east. And always beneath the rituals and refinements. You watch. You are the only female emperor in Chinese history. Not a shadow ruler. Not a consort whispering behind curtains, but the sovereign. And yet you still like your candied lotus seeds just slightly chilled. The throne no longer creaks when you sit upon it. It has adapted to your weight, your presence, your voice. You are Wu Zetian, Wandi of China, the first, the only, and by now, nobody calls that controversial. They just call it Tuesday. Of course, power invites whispers. It always does. There are rumors that you see omens in falling petals, that you sleep on silk embroidered with your own name in ancient seal script, that you have dreams of golden dragons slithering across the stars. You encourage none of these stories, but you correct none of them either. You commission mirrors, hundreds of them, from bronze workshops in Luoyang, not for vanity, but because you believe in reflection. Each mirror is etched with sayings about justice, clarity, and good governance. Some say you use them to study your enemies, watching for flickers of guilt when they see their own faces. More likely, you just like things to shine. At this point, your court is humming like a wasp's nest that also happens to be tastefully decorated. You've surrounded yourself with eunuchs, scholars, astrologers, and the occasional failed poet who somehow gives excellent military advice. They come from all corners of the empire, and they owe everything to you, which is how you like it. But not everyone bows so easily. Aristocratic clans continue to resist, some in private, some in the form of well-meaning memorials questioning your policies. You accept the scrolls, read them slowly, and respond with polite footnotes accompanied by sudden administrative audits and surprise retirements. You've also developed a fondness for guest interviews. It's not torture, it's tea. You invite a difficult official to your chamber, serve him warm rice porridge and slivers of smoked goose, and casually ask about troop movements in the western provinces. The conversation ends with a sudden change in tone and a quiet exit from public life. No blood, just bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether your rule was paranoid or practical, whether your methods were cruel or merely sharp-edged. But anyone who's ever managed a group project with 10,000 bickering warlords might understand your approach. Meanwhile, in the kitchens, your tastes become legend. You prefer early morning rice gruel with fermented tofu, balanced by thin-cut candied carrot slivers and just a hint of five-spice. Your chefs learn to rotate snacks with the seasons, lotus-wrapped sticky rice in spring, chilled lychee balls in summer, taro buns in autumn, pine nut fritters in winter. Foreign envoys try to impress you with gifts: amber from the steppes, ivory from Compa, cinnamon from India. You accept them graciously. But when a visiting prince presents you with an enormous fish glazed in kumquat jam and studded with cloves, you raise one eyebrow and ask, "Did your mother prepare this?" He does not return the following year. The palace grows more refined, more precise. Even your afternoon walks are orchestrated. You stroll through gardens filled with peony trees, magnolia blossoms, and trained cranes. An attendant carries chilled chrysanthemum wine. Another carries a fan you never use. You pause by a pond, watch koi ripple the surface, and say nothing. Sometimes silence is your sharpest tool, but not all your influence is quiet. You erect a towering stele, your own unspoken monument. It bears no inscription, no praise, no decree, just polished stone. Some say it's humility. Others say it's the ultimate boast, that your deeds are too vast for words. You, of course, offer no explanation. You also continue reshaping the bureaucracy. You create new offices, including one specifically for monitoring officials' behavior. You call it the Bureau of Scrutiny. Nobody likes being scrutinized, but they behave better. Coincidence? And then there are the astrologers. You love them, well, not as people, as tools. You consult them before major reforms, and when they tell you Venus is in the house of merit, you pass a new tax exemption for widows. When they say a red star flickered near the northern sky, you commission a temple dedicated to the protection of orphans. Your ministers know it's not really about the stars, but they also know the people love it. A ruler who listens to the heavens. Comforting. One astrologer gifts you a rice cake shaped like a dragon. You smile. You assign him to the Imperial Calendar Bureau. Promotions are everywhere. If you know what shape to serve your pastry in, and still you snack, quietly, deliberately. You have a bowl of pickled lotus root slices beside your desk during council meetings. You dip them slowly in vinegar mixed with crushed Sichuan pepper. The court watches, hypnotized. One minister misspeaks during a tax review. You offer him a slice. He turns pale. Lesson learned. By now, the imperial kitchens function like an extension of the throne. They anticipate your moods. They know that when you request persimmon pudding before a meeting, you're planning a reshuffle. When you order salted duck eggs and scallion pancakes before bed, you're preparing to draft something significant. Food has become your language. You send trays of pastries as warnings. You deny desserts as reprimands. You offer spiced candied walnuts as invitations never to refuse, never without risk. Sometimes you take your meals alone. Other times, you invite a nervous official to join you for soup and quiet questions. They never know which version of you they're dining with, the Empress who favors honeyed yam slices, or the one who once dissolved an entire ministry over a single misleading censor scroll. But always you remain composed. Always you rule. And the empire, perhaps for the first time in memory, knows exactly who's in charge. You rise earlier these days not because you must, but because there's something satisfying about being awake. Before your rivals have even dreamt of scheming, you stroll the palace courtyards in dawn mist, silk slippers whispering over cool stone, a warm cup of jujube tea in your hand, and perhaps a delicate sweet steamed bun tucked into your sleeve. Just in case, you are now in your late 60s and still your presence cuts sharper than ever. Your court fears you, yes, but they also admire you. You are the empire's fixed point, the sun that rises whether they offer prayers or not. You've ruled longer than some of them have lived. Still, you do not slow. Your policies continue to evolve. You push for land redistribution reforms, controversial, but effective. You continue funding public works, roads, irrigation, the restoration of neglected temples. The empire becomes more connected, more stable, and for the first time in decades, even the rural provinces feel the warm pressure of central governance. You also establish a new secretariat, a small but powerful office that reports solely to you. Officially, they're clerks. Unofficially, they're your eyes, ears, and when needed, your velvet-gloved fist. Historians still argue whether this shadowy council made your government more efficient, or simply more feared, but none deny their loyalty or their effectiveness. You surround yourself with younger advisors, now brilliant, ambitious men who owe everything to you. Some call them the Empress's favorites. Some accuse you of indulging them. You let them whisper. Meanwhile, you train these men like chefs train apprentices, sharpening their instincts, refining their flavors. You like your governance like you like your soup, well seasoned, carefully layered and served hot enough to wake the senses. Your diet has shifted with age. You favor simpler meals now, warm millet porridge with pickled radish, soft dumplings with ginkgo nut, but your tea preferences have grown fussier. You request wild chrysanthemum picked only after the first frost, steeped no more than 6 seconds. One overstep, and the entire tray is quietly sent back. No anger, just disappointment and a note in your ledger. Your ledger is legendary. No one sees it, but all know of it. In it, you write names, not enemies' patterns. Who shows up early? Who falters during debate? Who switched alliances after one too many mooncakes at another minister's banquet? You remember everything, but you record it anyway. Because memory is mortal, ink is not. Your bureaucracy becomes more merit-based. You elevate men from farming backgrounds if they can pass your impossible exams. You promote women rarely, carefully, but when you do, you choose ones with steel beneath their silk. There's a famous case of a female magistrate in the South who out-argued 3 governors. You send her a carved jade comb and a handwritten note. Continue. Meanwhile, the nobility grumbles. They call you unorthodox. They accuse your court of being filled with sycophants and flatterers. You smile, sip your tea, and remind them, I choose who sits at the table. If they want roast goose and rice wine, they can earn it. One night, you host a banquet not grand, but intimate, just 12 guests. You serve rare dishes from across the empire, fermented bamboo shoots from Yunnan, honeyed hawthorn from Hebei, fried lotus seeds from Sichuan. Between courses, you discuss crop yields, poetry, and celestial portents. No politics, at least not directly, but every dish tells a story, every ingredient a metaphor. You ask one minister why his province hasn't produced its promised shipment of millet. He blames drought. You offer him a pear slightly overripe. He understands. You've turned hospitality into a weapon, a soft one, but still a blade. Still, you know your legacy won't be settled by banquets. So you begin commissioning texts, histories, philosophical commentaries, essays that reinforce your legitimacy. You do not rewrite facts, but you reframe them. After all, history is just memory, written with good posture. You also begin drafting a new set of laws, less rigid, less punitive, more focused on fairness and rehabilitation. Critics say it's too soft. You point out that compassion is harder to wield than cruelty, and while they debate your motivations, you snack. A new favorite emerges, plum cakes brushed with sweet rice syrup, then grilled lightly over sandalwood coals, a flavor both bold and fleeting, much like political favor. One of your newer officials tries to impress you by offering grilled chestnut skewers, dipped in peppered honey. You eat one, raise an eyebrow. He is promoted the following week, but not all are so lucky. You begin quietly, removing those who've grown complacent. A subtle shift in invitations, a missed festival, a temporary reassignment. Your court becomes leaner, more agile, and yet there are moments of softness. You visit temples anonymously. You listen. 2 children sing ritual songs. You once spend an hour watching an elderly monk feed a blind turtle rice balls soaked in tea. You donate gold not for spectacle, but because you remember what it's like to have nothing but wits and a meal you weren't sure was safe to eat. You also begin dreaming differently, not of power, but of quiet. A garden with stone paths, a bowl of almond soup, a breeze strong enough to carry incense, but not strong enough to stir your scrolls. You wonder sometimes if that's peace or just the soft sound of history preparing to sleep. You're nearing 70 now, and still, your court follows your every breath as though it's an imperial edict. By this point, you've outlasted every critic who ever called you a temporary inconvenience. You've watched governors grow grey in your service, and then retire to the countryside with cushioned pensions and a strong respect for your fondness for cold pickled ginger. But you haven't slowed. Not really. You've simply refined your pace. You now begin every morning with a walk beneath trailing wisteria vines, followed by a light breakfast, thin millet porridge with orange blossom honey, and 3 slices of steamed pear dusted in powdered cardamom. You say it clears the mind. it also sends a signal elegant restraint, a lesson to the overstuffed noble class who still think feasting equals ruling. And speaking of ruling, your grip remains firm, but subtle. You've perfected the art of governance. By gesture, a raised eyebrow in court can delay a tax campaign. A frown during a poetry reading can spark 3 resignations. You rarely raise your voice anymore. You don't need to dot the empire. It seems has adjusted to your frequency. You continue to host audiences, but you've grown choosier. You only meet with those who bring solutions, not problems. If someone enters your chamber with a whimpering tone or the scent of excuses, you nod, listen, offer them a candied plum, and then quietly erase their influence before sunset. One afternoon, an overeager young minister proposes a new grain levy to increase revenue. He brings charts, diagrams, even a dessert tray shaped like the provincial map. You eat the part representing. Sichuan sweetened yam with chili sugar, then kindly suggest he reconsider his math. He does. Meanwhile, your relationship with the common people grows stronger. You lower grain prices during famines. You standardize units of measure across markets. You commission schools, not temples disguised as schools, but actual classrooms with chalk, bamboo slips, and instructors trained to teach thinking, not just recitation. You also simplify laws for marriage and inheritance, giving women more voice in family matters. The Confucianists is like startled cats. You smile, offer them plum wine, and then do exactly as you please. Historians still argue whether you were a feminist icon or simply a pragmatic ruler who happened to be a woman. But at this point in the story, those debates feel like background noise compared to the sound of your empire, ticking neatly forward like a well-wound clock. You begin compiling a revised history of your reign, not a flattering memoir, something more durable. A scroll that future generations will read not with awe, but with understanding. You assign your best scribes to the task. You reward their accuracy with salted lotus chips and cushioned slippers for winter. Meanwhile, your personal indulgences become increasingly quiet. You ask the kitchens for softer dishes, chilled tofu with sesame glaze, tender red bean jelly, mung bean soup with sweet osmanthus. Your teeth ache a little now. Age has its ways. But your mind, still sharp enough to split a proverb in half and stitch it back together with irony. You also start declining certain banquets, not because you can't attend, but because absence, when carefully wielded, becomes its own form of power. And yet, you are not without reflection. You remember your first nights in the palace, how your shoes pinched, how you spoke too softly, how you watched every bite others took before daring to eat your own. Now, you order sweet rice cakes filled with pickled kumquat, served on lacquered trays shaped like calla lilies. You invite generals and judges to sit across from you and explain their mistakes slowly with diagrams. You correct them gently, then feed them spiced tamarind candy as they nod and promise to do better. But the tides of time creep, even for you. Your body tires more easily. You nap in short bursts, head resting against pillows stitched with poems you wrote in your 20s. Your dreams are filled with drifting incense smoke, long corridors, and bowls of tea that never quite cool. You begin to speak less in court. When you do speak, it's usually in questions. What would you do if no one praised you for it? Do you believe your children will remember your service or your mistakes? Why is this dumpling overcooked? That last one leads to the dismissal of an entire kitchen wing. You still ride in a gilded litter, draped with silk canopies and carried by guards trained not just in formation, but in poetry. You believe every soldier should recite at least one verse before breakfast. Rhythm builds discipline. One evening, during a quiet court session, you ask your ministers what they believe happens to rulers after death. Their answers range from the pious to the philosophical. You offer no opinion. You merely bite gently into a ginger-glazed almond cookie and say, "Make sure I'm remembered for what mattered." And so, your legacy continues to crystallize. Not in portraits, though there are many, not in statues, though several tower above gardens, but in policy, in structure, in how people speak the name Zetian not as scandal, but as fact. You have become an institution, and still, You reach for one more slice of steamed sweet potato, still warm from the brazier, not because you're hungry, but because, in this small act the savoring of a quiet, honest flavor, you are reminded that you did not rule through fear or fate. You ruled because you watched, you tasted, you waited, and then, when it was time, you rewrote the banquet seating plan of history itself. You are now old in a way that few rulers ever lived to be, not just grey of hair or slower of step, but old like weathered stone smoothed by time, still unbreakable, still watching. Your days have grown quieter, but your presence still fills the palace like sandalwood smoke drifting through corridors, lingering on sleeves, impossible to ignore. You've begun spending more time in your private chambers, not in retreat, but in reflection. The walls are hung with silk scrolls, some bearing poems written in your youth, others displaying calligraphy sent by scholars hoping to catch your favor with their brushwork. You critique them silently, sipping rice tea laced with chrysanthemum, your favorite snack now, soft almond tofu with rose syrup, served cold, in porcelain dishes shaped like open lotus blossoms. You like the contrast, the coolness, the softness, the silence broken only by a silver spoon. Outside these calm interiors, your empire continues to run with astonishing regularity. That, perhaps, is your greatest achievement. You've built something that no longer needs your constant hand. Your ministers arrive, bow, present reports, and leave with decisions already made in your quiet glance. The capital hums with order. Provincial governors send in scrolls sealed with red wax requests, tributes, occasional poetry. You reply to everyone in your own hand. You've also begun receiving strange offerings from beyond the border's jade. Lions from Tibet, scrolls inked in foreign scripts from the West. Salted cheeses you politely regift to ambitious generals with sturdier stomachs. There's talk of trade routes expanding, silk flowing westward, spices coming east. You nod, ask for a map, and trace possible caravan lines with your fingertip over a plate of sesame-dusted melon slices. And yet the court continues to stir with quiet tension. You've ruled longer than many ever imagined. Some begin to hope dangerously, foolishly for change, a younger face, a familiar name. Perhaps one of the sons you once sidelined. They whisper of succession. You hear it all. The walls have ears, yes, but most of them belong to you, and when a plot is uncovered, minor, clumsy, more desperate than dangerous, you handle it the way you've always handled such things, with precision. The would-be plotters are dismissed, not executed. They're sent to monasteries, agricultural posts, or poetry schools far from the capital. You don't need martyrs. You need silence. Historians still argue whether your leniency was strategic or sentimental in these final years, whether you had softened or merely streamlined. You allow yourself one indulgence, a commemorative banquet held on your 75th birthday. It's modest. By your standards, just 100 guests. You wear white, trimmed in pale gold. Your headdress is lighter now. You've grown tired of weight. The dishes are carefully chosen, lotus root with candied jujube, steamed fish in chrysanthemum broth, rice cakes shaped like plum blossoms. You taste everything, but eat very little. Your appetite has grown selective, like your company. During the feast, a young poet rises nervously, visibly sweating through his robe, and recites a verse comparing you to the North Star. Unmoving, unshaken, ever glowing. It's technically clumsy, but you smile anyway. He tried. You reward him with a scroll of your own poetry from your years as concubine. He nearly faints. Afterwards, you return to your chambers and request warm almond milk with sweet osmanthus syrup. You sip it slowly, watching the moon rise between the slats of your lacquered window screen. The world outside is changing. There are new fashions, new words, new metaphors. People write of you in the past tense, even though you are very much alive. You find it amusing. You correct the phrasing with a red brush. You still walk the gardens when your legs permit it. The stone paths are familiar beneath your slippers. You pause by the koi pond. One fish, a pale silver one with a notch in its fin, seems to recognize you. You name it Counselor Jin. It's promoted to your personal pond. Your attendants know to keep the garden quiet. The cranes do not cry near your chamber. The wind is directed by bamboo chimes. Even the kitchen adjusts its schedule. Your evening tofu is served in near silence. The clinking of utensils muffled by cloth sleeves. And yet, you still listen. Every night, you read reports. You draft notes in the margins. You track rainfall in the southern provinces and grain output near the Yellow River. You make suggestions, nothing sweeping, just nudges. You rule now the way one trims a bonsai tree. Lightly, precisely. With centuries in mind, you also begin composing your own epitaph. Not for your tombstone, no, that's too small, but for history. You ask no one to praise you, only to remember you accurately. You were not gentle. You were not cruel. You were necessary. You revise the phrasing while nibbling on snow fungus. With red dates, it helps your lungs, the physicians say. You trust them, but you also prepare your own remedies. Ginger soaked in honey, lotus seeds boiled in almond milk, tea steeped exactly 17 seconds. A bit longer if the stars are favorable. You dream more now. Not of war or court intrigue, but of the library where you once read by candlelight as a girl. Of the day you wrote your first edict in your husband's hand. Of the plum cake served to you by a trembling eunuch, who would later become the empire's most efficient postmaster. And in these dreams, you are always walking forward, always in motion, not toward an ending, but toward stillness. The wind feels gentler now, or perhaps you've grown gentler with it. You no longer ride out to temple dedications, nor preside in court with the full orchestra of drums and strings. You no longer lecture ministers for mispronouncing filial piety or for selecting tea to bitter for diplomacy, but you are still here, and your presence still wraps around the palace like heavy velvet, soft, but impossible to remove. The mornings are slower. You wake to warm towels, ginger-scented, steam, and bowls of clear congee. The porridge is flavored lightly with goji berries and a spoonful of longan syrup. You eat just enough to ground yourself. The rest is left untouched. Someone in the kitchens will finish it. Waste has always annoyed you. Your thoughts drift more often now. Not away, but back. You remember your early days before the throne, before the silks, before the bowing and the breakfast trays of candied lotus root. You remember the nervous flutter of entering the palace for the first time. A girl in plain shoes. A girl who knew when to listen and when to pretend not to. Sometimes you still feel like that girl, except now the corridors bend for your passage, and the scrolls bear your handwriting, not others. But you are not sentimental. You reflect, yes. You revisit, carefully. But you don't dwell. The past is just another archive to be properly labeled. You spend your afternoons on the veranda, wrapped in layers of cloud-colored silk. A brazier burns sandalwood at your feet. Birds flit through the plum trees. The occasional courtier arrives fewer. Now, mostly the ones who understand the language of silence. You speak less, you write more. Brush in hand, you compose gentle essays on order, nature, and quiet governance. You call them seasonal reflections. You tuck them into scroll boxes for future dynasties. Whether anyone reads them, you cannot say. But you've always believed in setting things down, just in case. Meanwhile, your legacy grows heavier by the hour. Poets sing your praises, some sincerely, some because the alternative is early retirement in a swampy province. You tolerate both kinds. Truth lives somewhere between flattery and fear. Historians still debate your rise. Was it ambition? Was it vengeance for being exiled? Was it simply a talent so sharp the world had no choice but to bleed a little? You don't answer. Instead, you request your favorite dish, braised yam in 5-spice syrup, served in a cracked porcelain bowl from your first winter in the capital. It tastes like snow melting into memory. You eat it slowly, letting it dissolve. One day, your physician lingers too long at your side. You smile. Tell him he worries too much. You request a mint tea with chrysanthemum petals. He adds ginseng without telling you. You notice. Say nothing. You've come to respect aging, not as decline, but as distillation. You are no longer doing. you are being, and the empire still follows your rhythms. Your last major decision is administrative, a reorganization of the tax system to better account for smaller landholders. It passes with minimal protest perhaps because you frame it as an adjustment. Language, as always, is your tool. Later, a young administrator sends you a carved ink stone as thanks. He includes a poem comparing your rule to a lantern that never flickers. It's not a great poem, but it's earnest. You add him to the succession list. Yes, succession. The question has grown louder in recent years, though never in your presence. Ministers whisper it in garden alcoves. Eunuchs hint at it while trimming the wisteria. You allow the discussion to ferment. Like vinegar, it sharpens with time. Finally, you signal your decision not with an announcement, but with a gift. To the favored heir, a small lacquer box containing 2 items, a map of the empire, hand-drawn, and a single preserved apricot, candied in the syrup of your personal orchard. He understands. He does not celebrate. He bows. He leaves. That, too, is a kind of ceremony. You are relieved, not because you're tired of power, but because you've never hoarded it for its own sake. You've ruled because it was necessary. And now, something else is. One last gift. You begin arranging your tomb, not to grand, not to plain, a blend of symbols, dragons, cranes, clouds, bamboo. You choose a passage of your own writing to be inscribed nearby. Let the record be neither praise nor condemnation, but the quiet echo of what was done. You taste it aloud. Not bad. Later that evening, you enjoy a bowl of almond tofu, extra chilled. You close your eyes between bites, not in exhaustion, just listening. The palace is quiet. The city beyond is calm. The empire you built, the dynasty you reshaped, still standing. You think of a question you once asked a minister. What would you do if history were listening? You smile, because it was. You do not disappear all at once. Impresses, even retired ones, tend to fade like incense slowly, steadily, leaving behind a lingering trace that clings to cushions, corridors, and conversations long after they've left the room. Your transition from supreme authority to shadowed matriarch happens gently. No grand declarations, no tearful farewells, just fewer appearances, more soft-footed attendance, and a careful shifting of responsibility to your chosen heir. He's capable enough, cautious, deferential, even a little too poetic for your taste. But he listens. He learns. You don't need another version of you, just someone who won't ruin the systems you forged. Now your focus narrows. Your days are filled with the small rituals you used to reserve for late evenings letter writing, reading old scrolls, sorting through gifts from provinces you've never visited. You develop an odd fascination with fans, paper ones, silk ones, intricately carved sandalwood ones painted with cranes or immortals or plum blossoms. You keep a rotating collection on your bedside table. Each day, a new fan, a new detail to admire. It's a quiet power, choosing beauty over bureaucracy. Meals have become simpler still. Breakfast is often just a cup of sweet rice porridge with preserved apricot. At lunch, you might request thin slices of steamed taro dipped in black sesame paste. At dinner, soft dumplings in mushroom broth, with a side of pickled bamboo. Some days, you don't finish them. You're not wasting. You're just not hungry. And besides, you're saving space for memory. You've taken to keeping a small notebook by your bed, not for policy, not for names, but for tastes. You jot down favorite snacks in careful, elegant brushstrokes, chilled hawthorn jelly, spring osmanthus cake, mid-autumn ginger peanut brittle for hard conversations, plum-glazed yam. Always I imagine a child reading this centuries from now and thinking, she ruled with this, and you smile, because yes, you did. Ruling, after all, was never just about decrees or armies. It was about attention, knowing what someone needed before they asked, sensing which tea would loosen a tongue, which pastry would soften a refusal. You ruled with tact, with timing, and occasionally with candied walnut clusters. Visitors are rare now. You allow only a fewer trusted eunuch, a childhood friend who now moves with a walking stick, a granddaughter who asks more questions than she bows. You allow it. She reminds you of, well, you. One day, she asks, "Grandmother, were you scared?" You answer without thinking, only of wasting time. She blinks, nods, offers you a sweet rice ball filled with red bean. You take it. She'll be fine. The physicians check on you often. Too often, you wave them away like morphs. Still, you accept their honey ginseng tonics and their fish broth boiled with dry dates. You appreciate the effort, even if you don't believe in its efficacy. Historians still argue what your final illness was: exhaustion, heart failure, quiet withdrawal. But you know the truth. It was timing. You knew when to rise. You know when to let go. You instruct that your final portrait not be painted. Let them remember the marble busts, the scrolls, the whispers. Let the historians do what they do best, argue over what you meant. Instead, you ask for a poem. You don't write it. You request it from a quiet court scribe with a cleft chin and a habit of leaving fresh flowers outside your door. You tell him 12 lines. No flattery. No metaphors about dragons. I want clouds and snacks. He delivers. It's lovely. You request it be carved onto a stone near your tomb, not on the tomb, but beside it, like a companion, leaning gently at your side. The tomb itself is ready. You visited it once unannounced, walked its cool halls, ran your hand across the polished stone, whispered, "Not yet," but soon you begin giving away possessions, slowly, thoughtfully. The fan with the silver peonies goes to a former advisor's daughter. Your favorite inkstone goes to the palace librarian. A cedarwood comb is left by a temple window where anyone may find it. Each gift a soft farewell. Each act a chapter closed. And still you eat. One night you ask for a bowl of rice, porridge with chrysanthemum petals and a thin slice of candied gourd. You eat it slowly. Between long pauses, you don't finish it. You place your spoon down. You fold your napkin with care. And you close your eyes, not because you're tired though you are, but because you're satisfied. Let them argue. Let them speculate. You ruled with silence, with sweetness, with something too sharp to name, but too soft to fear. And in the end, your recipe was simple. Observe carefully, choose wisely, and never underestimate what a perfect plum cake can do. It begins with a rumor. It always does. Have you heard? They whisper in corridors thick with incense. She hasn't appeared for 3 days. And then her tea was returned untouched. And finally, the kitchen was silent last night. By the time the sun rises, the court already knows, though no one dares say it aloud. You are still breathing. But now your breath is like a candle in the final moments before it dims, not for lack of wax, but because it has said everything it needs to say. They keep the palace quiet, as you would have wanted. No scrambling, no weeping, just soft-footed. Servants whispering eunuchs, and your handmaidens folding robes with deliberate care. As though the cloth might shatter. In your chamber, you rest on silks the color of mountain mist. You're wrapped in layers so light they barely seem to exist. Beside your bed, a tray, one final bowl of almond tofu uneaten, a fan with a faded peach blossom, a small bell no one rings. Your mind drifts between worlds, now memories blurring, with dreams, past moments reshaping themselves like ink spilled across parchment. You're 15 again, tucking your first love poem into a scroll you knew no one would read. You're 33, sitting in silence after your husband's death, surrounded by men who underestimated your grief and your patience. You're 65, frowning over a poorly written tax edict while nibbling on ginger sesame crisps. You're all these selves at once, layered like your favorite dumplings, each one soft, distinct and perfectly folded. Outside, the plum trees have begun to bloom early. A servant picks one blossom and places it in a small bowl of water beside your bed. You don't open your eyes, but you smile. You remember that scent. And so the empire waits. The ministers meet, somber-faced, speaking softly as if volume might hasten time. Officials pen contingency plans. Astrologers scan the skies. A comet is spotted, which one anxious eunuch insists must be auspicious. You'd laugh if you could muster the breath. The kitchens prepare your favorite meal anyway. Not for you now, but as part of the rites. They simmer sweet congee with osmanthus, prepare fried rice cakes brushed with honey, and plate small wedges of candied yam in concentric circles, like the rings of time. Meanwhile, your chosen heir waits, beside your bed, not in the center, but off to one side as you trained him. Power is heavy. He's learning how to carry it. He doesn't cry. You made sure of that. Instead, he takes your hand not to hold, but to feel the pulse that once ruled 60 million people with the precision of a drumbeat. Historians still argue about this moment. Some say your final words were a proverb. Others claim you whispered a name. A few insist you asked for persimmon pudding, and then smiled at your own joke. The truth, you said nothing, because everything necessary had already been said. And when your last breath leaves your body, it does so gently as, if even death dares not disrupt your elegance. Outside, the wind rises slightly. The cranes in the courtyard stretch their wings unsettled. Somewhere, a scribe dips his brush to begin the next chapter. And in the kitchens, one final dish cools on the tray. A piece of honey-glazed lotus root, carefully sliced, UNEATEN it is, not cleared away. They leave it there as you would have preferred, quietly waiting. A soft punctuation mark on a life written in full. The morning begins before the announcement, not with wails or black banners, but with hush. Servants glide instead of step. Courtiers speak only in nods, even the palace birds, as if understanding, stay unusually still on their lacquered perches. You are gone, but your presence is not. The official proclamation is carved, inked, and read by the grand historian, his voice brittle with age, barely rising above the breeze. He doesn't embellish. He doesn't dare. He says only what you would have wanted, your name, your reign, your years. No grand titles, just fact. But the empire grieves in its own way. In the southern provinces, women bake almond cakes with extra ginger, your favorite. They hand them to children who've never heard your voice, but know your face from coin and song. In the north, farmers leave small bowls of millet on their altars. Even the border guards, those half-forgotten figures, posted to windy outposts, pause to mark the sky just in case it tells them something. You would have found it excessive. You always said legacy is for the insecure. Still, they remember. Your tomb is ready, set into a mountain's shoulder, carved from quiet stone and lined with silk. It is everything you instructed, austere, balanced, with just a single poem on the path leading in. No trumpets, no jade fanfare, just earth and sky, embracing your memory like an old friend. At the private interment ceremony, a small tray is placed beside your resting place. On it, a spoon carved from sandalwood, a square of osmanthus jelly, and a note written in your own hand. Leave nothing uneaten. Your heir speaks briefly. He doesn't try to match your eloquence. He knows better. He thanks you for structure, for legacy, and, curiously, for your love of grilled yam, which he confesses he's never managed to enjoy but will keep on the palace menu in your honor. He doesn't cry, but later someone sees him alone by the koi pond, scattering plum blossom petals into the water one by one. Until the fish forget they're waiting for food. In the following weeks, the empire holds steady. Your system strong, sensible, merciless when needed, function as if you still direct them. Officials rise at dawn. Grain ships dock as scheduled. Messengers ride swiftly, using routes you mapped to decades earlier with a fan and a bowl of pickled radish. Your heir issues a proclamation confirming all current laws remain in place. No sweeping reforms, no purges, just a quiet statement. We are continuing. Historians still debate how much of your influence remains in those early months. Some say the court moved on quickly. Others argue your shadow lingered across every corridor, every decree, every candied lotus root ordered in the kitchen. But among the people, your memory is warm. Children hear bedtime stories of your cleverness, how you once tricked a corrupt minister with nothing but a bowl of fish balls, Street vendors nickname their spiciest chili sauce. Zetians smile. In temples, monks still light incense on your birthday, just in case. In a mountain village far from the capital, an elderly woman paints your likeness onto a folding screen. Not the official version, all dragons and imperial posture. No, this one shows you seated at a low table, lifting a spoonful of sweet bean soup. Eyebrows raised at someone just off frame, likely daring them to comment on the syrup's thickness. And in the palace, your granddaughter grows into her voice. She walks the garden paths you once favored. She memorizes your policies, your poems, your pauses. One evening, she orders the kitchen to serve chilled plum soup. Just as you liked it, though, she adds a sprinkle of cinnamon, her own twist. The servants raise eyebrows. She shrugs. Tradition improves with taste. You would have smiled. You would have said nothing. You always knew when to let a moment finish itself. Time begins to do what it always does: smooth, soften, and rearrange. You, once the sharp edge of the dynasty, are now a story, not forgotten, just settled. Like sediment in a bowl of old tea, the imperial records preserve your dates. Your edicts are catalogued. Your reforms live on in laws no one realizes you wrote. Even the tax code still bears a section titled Zetian Exemptions, a quiet nod to your understanding that generosity is sometimes the best control. But your presence shifts from official to atmospheric. Tourists visit your tomb, some with reverence, others with curiosity. They leave offerings, mostly flowers, some coins, once even a bag of dried mango. No one quite knows why. Your poems are still studied. Your brush strokes, though less celebrated than your policies, are admired for their balance. A calligraphy. Teacher in Luoyang insists her students copy your verse on silence at least once before graduation. She claims it teaches patience and wrist control. But outside the scholars and specialists, your memory lives most vividly in the kitchen. In the capital's tea houses, patrons still order Empress dumplings, soft rice parcels with spiced yam, wrapped in lotus leaf and steamed until they glisten. Supposedly your favorite comfort dish. Whether it actually was doesn't matter. It is now. Children nibble on candied lotus slices from stalls near the temple steps. Their parents joke. Careful, you'll get clever like Wu Zetian. Some children pretend to be you during games. They wave folded fans like scepters and sentence stuffed animals to exile for insufficient flattery. At festivals, storytellers revive your life with flourishes. One adds a talking fox who advises you on court politics. Another claims you once tamed a tiger using only plum wine and sheer disdain. The facts twist, but the heart of it stays. You ruled, and you did so with a style no one can quite replicate. Historians still disagree on how to categorize you. One calls you a tyrant with excellent culinary taste. Another calls you a philosopher in disguise. A third simply titles a paper, Wu Zetian, the woman who ate history. You would have appreciated that one at least for its boldness. And what of your heir? He rules capably, but never outshines you. He doesn't try. He adapts. He governs. He eventually retires with far less ceremony than you, preferring to fade into monastic peace and papaya snacks. But he keeps your traditions alive. Every winter solstice, he requests your almond tofu recipe. Every spring, he walks the plum garden you planted. And every night before a difficult decision, he lights a stick of sandalwood incense and sits with a cup of jujube tea. No prayers, just habit, just memory. Your granddaughter, meanwhile, grows into a force of her own. She refuses to marry young. She studies law and agricultural policy. She writes long essays on statecraft. She eats plum-glazed yam when she's annoyed. The court calls her the little Empress. She does not object. She is not you, but she is proof that you happened. And across the empire, your presence lingers not as command, but as suggestion, in quiet discipline, in perfectly brewed tea, in knowing when to speak and when to let others talk themselves into corners, even in food. Your mark remains. A certain preparation of pickled radish, once considered too strong for refined tables, now appears in noble banquets. A spicy ginger paste you once ordered from the West is now standard in winter markets. And a sweet porridge, served with dried longan and chrysanthemum, is still known as midnight Empress soup, best eaten slowly, preferably while rereading old letters, because ultimately, that's what you left behind. Not just policies, not just poetry, but taste, texture, rhythm. You made ruling an art of attention, and even now, long after your footsteps faded from the marble halls, the empire still adjusts its tone to match yours, measured, deliberate, quietly sweet. Time begins to do what it always does: smooth, soften, and rearrange. You, once the sharp edge of the dynasty, are now a story, not forgotten, just settled. Like sediment in a bowl of old tea, the imperial records preserve your dates. Your edicts are catalogued. Your reforms live on in laws no one realizes you wrote. Even the tax code still bears a section titled Zetian exemptions, a quiet nod to your understanding. That generosity is sometimes the best control, but your presence shifts from official to atmospheric. Tourists visit your tomb, some with reverence, others with curiosity. They leave offerings, mostly flowers, some coins, once even a bag of dried mango. No one quite knows why. Your poems are still studied. Your brushstrokes, though less celebrated than your policies, are admired for their balance. A calligraphy teacher in Luoyang insists her students copy your verse on silence at least once before graduation. She claims it teaches patience and wrist control. But outside the scholars and specialists, your memory lives most vividly in the kitchen, in the capital's tea houses. Patrons still order Empress dumplings, soft rice parcels, with spiced yam wrapped in lotus leaf and steamed until they glisten. Supposedly your favorite comfort dish. Whether it actually was doesn't matter. It is now. Children nibble on candied lotus slices from stalls near the temple steps. Their parents joke. Careful, you'll get clever like Wu Zetian. Some children pretend to be you during games. They wave folded fans like scepters and sentence stuffed animals to exile for insufficient flattery. At festivals, storytellers revive your life with flourishes. One adds a talking fox who advises you on court politics. Another claims you once tamed a tiger using only plum wine and sheer disdain. The facts twist, but the heart of it stays. You ruled, and you did so with a style no one can quite replicate. Historians still disagree on how to categorize you. One calls you a tyrant with excellent culinary taste. Another calls you a philosopher in disguise. A third simply titles her paper Wu Zetian, the woman who ate history. You would have appreciated that one at least for its boldness. And what of your heir? He rules capably, but never outshines you. He doesn't try. He adapts. He governs. He eventually retires with far less ceremony than you, preferring to fade into monastic peace and papaya snacks. But he keeps your traditions alive. Every winter solstice, he requests your almond tofu recipe. Every spring, he walks the plum garden you planted. And every night before a difficult decision, he lights a stick of sandalwood incense and sits with a cup of jujube tea. No prayers, just habit, just memory. Your granddaughter, meanwhile, grows into a force of her own. She refuses to marry young. She studies law and agricultural policy. She writes long essays on statecraft. She eats plum-glazed yam when she's annoyed. The court calls her the little Empress. She does not object. She is not you, but she is proof that you happened. And across the empire, your presence lingers not as command, but as suggestion, in quiet discipline, in perfectly brewed tea, in knowing when to speak and when to let others talk themselves into corners, even in food. Your mark remains, a certain preparation of pickled radish, once considered too strong for refined tables, now appears in noble banquets. A spicy ginger paste you once ordered from the West is now standard in winter markets. And a sweet porridge, served with dried longan and chrysanthemum, is still known as midnight Empress soup, best eaten slowly, preferably while rereading old letters, because ultimately that's what you left behind. Not just policies, not just poetry, but taste, texture, rhythm. You made ruling an art of attention, and even now, Long after your footsteps faded from the marble halls, the empire still adjusts. Its tone to match yours measured, deliberate, quietly sweet. Word count 1. 093 awaiting continue ban connoy. Continue chat connoy, section 15. The years stretch on, gently, like silk unrolling across a lacquered table. You, once the center of the world's most complex court, are now the stillness behind it, a name, a memory, a gravity. New emperors come, some bold, some nervous. Some try to emulate your policies. Others quietly try to undo them, only to find that the threads you wove are too tightly stitched. Even when unspoken, your reforms remain the backbone of governance. It is difficult to dismantle something that was built so elegantly in the countryside. Old farmers still refer to Zetian's tax, not realizing the law they're quoting was revised for times after your death. But that's the point, isn't it? When the architecture is good, the name doesn't matter, it simply works. In marketplaces, vendors hawk Empress cakes, usually some combination of almond, ginger, and rose water. Every city seems to have its own version, and every seller swears theirs was the original. Somewhere, a girl hears the name Zetian for the first time, not from a history scroll, but while licking plum syrup from her fingers. You would have liked that, because in the end, your legacy is not carved in marble. It's carried in gestures, in the way officials review grain, records with a touch more care, in the soft clink of teacups during court discussions, where even silence means something, in the way a minister chooses his words, knowing precision is a form of respect. Your granddaughter, now grown, becomes a powerful advisor. She keeps a portrait of you hidden behind her work desk, not one of the official ones, but a sketch made on rice paper, showing you mid-laugh, holding a spoon over a too large bowl of candied yam. She consults it before every major decision. One day, she receives a poem anonymously delivered to her chambers. It reads, "If power was a dish, she served it warm, no garnish, no lies. Just taste that lingered long, it's unsigned. But she knows who inspired it." She pens a response, "She ruled not with fire, but with recipe, and the world, surprised, swallowed every bite." And so the story continues, not in scrolls alone, but in kitchens, in gardens, in quiet rooms where people pause before action, remembering the Empress who taught an entire empire the value of observation and dessert. Even now, centuries later, a traveler might find a shrine tucked into the folds of a mountain pass dedicated not to gods or generals, but to a woman, seated calmly with a fan in one hand and a plate of honeyed lotus root in the other. Offerings are left, rice cakes, almonds, even the occasional strip of ginger candy wrapped in red cloth, some light incense. Others leave paper notes folded tight, as if you're still listening. Maybe you are. Historians still argue. They will always argue over your motives, your methods, your meaning. But while they debate, the world you shaped keeps going, functioning, adjusting, thriving. And when night falls over the capital and the lanterns flicker against the wind, there's a pause, a stillness, a breath, and somewhere in a quiet room behind heavy screens, someone ladles out a bowl of warm almond soup, sits back, and wonders, what would Zetian do? They take a bite, and the answer, of course, is in the taste. And now, as the last light fades behind the lacquered walls of memory, we rest. The tale of Empress Zetian, full of iron and elegance, comes to a close not with thunder or ceremony, but with the rustle of silk robes and the scent of osmanthus. Drifting through an open window. You are calm now. The story, so richly layered, has folded itself like a dumpling, firm, complete, and quietly satisfying. Let your thoughts soften. Let the flicker of old lanterns lull your breath into rhythm. The palace corridors are empty now, but not lonely. They echo with the hush of her legacy, every step precise, every silence deliberate. You see the plum trees again, touched with morning mist. The almond tofu rests in its porcelain bowl, cool to the touch, sweet on the tongue. A fan lies open. Beside it, painted with cranes flying toward the horizon, they do not hurry. Neither should you. Let yourself drift slowly like sandalwood smoke through paper screens. The world she ruled has gone quiet now, just as she intended. Nothing sharp remains. Only memory, only taste, only rest dots, so close your eyes. Let the wind carry your thoughts beyond the mountain tomb, beyond the scrolls and poems, out into the warm hush of the empire she shaped. You are safe, you are still, and the story will still be here when you wake.